Hello, my name is Andrew Charlton. I had the honour of chairing the ITF Roundtable on airport slots recently, and I'd just like to bring you up to date with what happened and where we're going. Airport slots are the system devised by the airlines in the late 70s to allocate capacity or access to capacity at airports, particularly at capacity-constrained airports. They were originally conceived as an interim measure while we wait for new airport capacity to be built. But it's become clear that building new airport capacity is one of life's really most difficult tasks. And consequently, slots have, in the 50 years or so since, cemented themselves into being a fundamental part of the way the airline industry organises. What has happened in the meantime, of course, is that the airline industry has become more obviously part of the aviation industry, and that airports are independent entities with their own interests and concerns. And indeed, regulators are interested more in the broad ecosystem of aviation rather than simply the very narrow focus of airlines. Nevertheless, in the meantime, the slots have continued to operate, frankly, for the benefit of the incumbent airlines and never for new airlines. Over time, there have been some changes to the rules, the most prominent being driven by the European Union in the late 90s, which required new slots that are created either through more efficient systems, more efficient processing, or indeed the building of new terminals, or from time to time new runways, to allow for half of those slots to go to new entrants rather than to the incumbents. And then the most significant change of late, just before the pandemic, was the rewriting of the rules to include a role for airports for the first ever time. During the pandemic, though, what we saw were the airlines gaming the slot system to some large extent until brought back in and brought to book. And by the end of the pandemic, I think what we finally had was an arrangement where airlines and airports and the coordinators did in fact talk and did in fact exchange views and allowed for a more efficient use of the slots. But nevertheless, I think there are criticisms, certainly driven in part by academic research, but not just. There are criticisms that the slot system as currently constructed is inefficient and quite wasteful, to the extent that's different. And consequently, it is completely appropriate that the ITF look at these issues. The ITF, it's got to be said, and many others. The European Commission is currently in a consultation about reform and development of the slot system. And consequently, over 2 days, we spent quite a lot of time looking at the existing system and how it works and where its shortfalls are. And then we spent quite some time also, I'm pleased to say, looking at some of the emerging issues. The first, of course, being simply how do we make slots part of making the entire aviation industry more competitive? Secondly, how do we address issues like environmental concerns? Because many people are hoping they can use the slot regime to drive the use or priority for more economic, environmentally efficient aeroplanes, and to try to expand the ways in which we manage noise, local environmental issues, and more broadly greenhouse gases, but also how we can manage to allow for the slot regime to allow, as I said, more generally competitive aviation for the benefit of everybody. Airports, of course, like their airport to have flights that go to and from all over the world. Airlines use particular airports to fly to particular places. That sounds obvious, but from an airport perspective versus an airline perspective, it can be quite a challenge. And so it's completely right that we talk about these things, and we had a really open and really helpful conversation. The other thing to note is in the United States, slot rules are very, very narrowly used. There are very few airports with slot rules, usually connected to international obligations. And in the United Kingdom, Brexit has given them an opportunity to look again, because they're no longer bound by the European slot rules. They can have their own slot rules. And so they are looking at ways to improve the environmental issues and also the competitive issues. The United States is looking for similar outcomes, I think. The next steps from here, after the roundtable, a report will be written. The ITF report will go into the mainstream of the reviews and thinking on slots, which of course is important, but not necessarily rapid, because it is a complex issue and there are perfectly valid concerns and requirements, both for the airports and for the airlines and for consumers and for regulators. But what we are definitely seeing, and I think, and this is why this roundtable was so important, what we are definitely seeing is a shift from slots being an airline self-regulation point to being one of the tools in the toolkit for regulators as they regulate the broader aviation industry. In doing that, they have to work very carefully, they have to work very responsibly, and also, of course, respect the interests of all parties. And so getting all parties around a table to talk about their concerns and interests was a very helpful thing, and I'm delighted that we've had the opportunity to do it. I look forward to the report, and I look forward to the next steps after that.